Every Saturday, at exactly 7 in the morning, a lawnmower started up across the street from Eleanor Whitmore's kitchen window. And every Saturday, Eleanor still felt a small flicker of surprise that it was running at all. She'd never asked him to do it. That was the part she came back to most, watching from behind the glass as Ethan Cole pushed the mower in careful, even rows across her yard. Nobody had asked this 35-year-old man to spend his one free morning a week tending a stranger's garden. He'd simply started, months ago, without explanation, without waiting to be thanked. Eleanor had learned enough basic sign language by now to tell him good morning properly. She'd learned, too, that Ethan communicated more through the careful, deliberate way he worked than most people managed through an entire conversation. He trimmed her flower beds after the mowing, cleared the branches that had fallen during the week, fixed the latch on her garden gate without being asked twice. Eleanor left him plates of food on the porch railing, homemade, still warm, and watched him eat them sitting on her steps, like it was the most natural thing in the world, for a stranger's kindness to be repaid in casseroles. She never once treated him like someone who needed pity. That, she suspected, was exactly why he kept coming back. Ethan had lost his parents in a road accident as a teenager, and his uncle Robert had taken him in out of obligation, more than warmth, a debt Ethan had spent years quietly repaying through labor nobody acknowledged. Robert's household ran smoother because of Ethan's hands, fixed machinery, tended yards, repaired what broke, yet somewhere along the way, gratitude had curdled into something closer to convenience. Ethan had become useful instead of family. Eleanor's garden was the one place that never felt that way. Then her daughter Charlotte came home. Charlotte Whitmore arrived back from years abroad, expecting relief, gratitude, the comfort of finding her mother cared for. What she found, instead, was a strange, uninvited resentment rising in her chest the first time she watched Eleanor laugh easily with a man she'd never met. The particular unguarded laugh Charlotte associated with her childhood, one she hadn't heard over a phone line in years. She didn't examine that jealousy, she simply aimed it at Ethan instead. She mocked his signing behind his back, spoke to him while deliberately turning her face away so he couldn't read her lips, made sharp comments about her mother adopting a new son. Ethan never retaliated. He simply stepped back whenever Charlotte arrived, absorbing the cruelty in silence, the way he'd absorbed most of his life's disappointments. Eleanor noticed everything. "He didn't replace you, Charlotte," she said one evening, voice steady but unmistakably wounded. "He was here when you couldn't be." Charlotte flinched at the truth of it, and retreated further into her own defensiveness, unwilling yet to look directly at what that jealousy actually meant. But avoidance has a way of eroding on its own. Charlotte began noticing things she'd been determined not to see. Ethan repairing her cousin's motorcycle without being asked, fixing a broken gate at his uncle's house, quietly helping neighbors up and down the street who barely acknowledged him in return. She learned, slowly, how much he carried for a household that treated him like an obligation instead of family. Then, one evening, Eleanor grew dizzy in her kitchen and nearly fell. Charlotte froze completely, useless with panic, unsure which medication her mother needed or who to call first. Ethan was there within seconds, calm and certain, guiding Eleanor safely into a chair, locating her medical information, walking Charlotte through exactly what needed to happen next. He never once mentioned, then or later, the months of cruelty she'd shown him. That night broke something open in Charlotte that months of quiet observation hadn't fully managed. She began learning American Sign Language, clumsy and determined, showing up in the garden not out of guilt performance, but genuine desire to finally understand him. She discovered, slowly, that his silence had never meant he had nothing to say, that he carried a dry, understated humor that surprised her every time it appeared, that patience wasn't the same thing as emptiness. Their relationship shifted, unhurried, from resentment into curiosity, curiosity into respect, respect eventually into something neither of them rushed to name. Ethan didn't trust it easily. He remembered every cruel joke, every deliberately turned face, and worried the change in her was only guilt wearing a gentler mask. Charlotte understood an apology wouldn't be enough to prove otherwise, so she simply stayed consistent, stopped speaking for him in rooms where he was capable of speaking for himself, defended him when others made careless comments, learned to see his deafness as one part of him rather than the whole of him. Around that same time, Robert and Linda made it clear that Ethan's place in their home had always been temporary, suggesting without much warmth that he find somewhere else to live. Ethan didn't beg to stay. He simply decided, with Eleanor's steady encouragement, to finally build something entirely his own. A small landscaping business, his years of quiet, uncredited skill, finally becoming something that belonged to him alone. Charlotte helped build the website, organize the appointments, manage the parts of running a business that required constant back-and-forth communication. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan wasn't simply surviving inside someone else's household. He was building. By autumn, Eleanor's garden bloomed fuller than it had in years. Charlotte finally sat her mother and Ethan down together and said what she'd needed to say for months. "I thought you were taking my place," she told him, voice thick. "I didn't realize you were helping me find my way back to her." Ethan considered that for a long moment. Then he signed, simply, "I never wanted your place." Charlotte smiled through tears. "That's why I love you." They married the following spring. In Eleanor's garden, surrounded by flowers Ethan had spent years quietly tending, and new varieties Charlotte had planted herself. Some of the very same ones he still planted every autumn out of habit more than instruction. After the ceremony, Charlotte took her mother's hand, while Ethan stood beside them both. "You started by mowing my lawn because you thought I needed help," Eleanor said, looking at Ethan, eyes bright. Then she turned to her daughter. "And somehow you both ended up helping each other." Years later, the garden still blooms every spring, tended now by a man who built a business entirely his own, alongside a wife who handles every conversation the world still occasionally makes difficult for him. Eleanor remains close by, never alone, never again worried about a daughter too far away to reach. What began as a quiet man mowing a stranger's lawn on a Saturday morning became slowly and honestly exactly what none of them expected. A lonely man finding a family that chose him on purpose, a daughter learning that love shared is never love lost, and one small weekly act of kindness growing into an entire life built together. If this story reminded you that the quietest kindness often grows into the deepest love, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. Leave it a like, and stay a little longer. There's always another story worth telling.